get ready, not just starting, but just setting up, and then as soon as you go ready. Yeah, keep writing there. Worry about the word.
Oh. Waiting.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, no, you're good.
Unless you want. I'll be. I'll forget. Oh, by the way, keep your time. We'll try clapping, but in a heated round like this, we might forget. Yep. Please keep your time. You may begin when you're ready.
Okay. OG's case is incredibly simple. First, it is very, very hard for the average person to leave a legacy. And two, even if they do leave a legacy, it has a tendency to be a bad one. Before that, I have two pieces of framing really quickly. First, what is a legacy? I think most people in this round will agree that it's big things like i.e. leaving a big inheritance for your family, like for example, like Bill Gates leaving his money, or i.e. like permanent things like being on the news that are recorded in like history books, to be like named, like have a place or a building named after you, etc., to have these things concretely in society. So then what it means to be leaving behind a legacy or a desire to do so is to have the desire to have some of these things exist for you, i.e. to have a big inheritance, i.e. to be remembered, to be mentioned in a history book. Then, first substantive. It is incredibly hard for the average person to leave a legacy. Why is that so? In the current society, there's three mechanisms as to why it is impossible for the average person to do so. One, there's just not that enough capacity in society. It is inherently competitive to be searching for a legacy, right? i.e. well, there's only one person who can be remembered for achieving something, which means everyone is inherently competing for that spot. In a society where there's like 8 billion people, it is incredibly hard for you to be that one person who does so. But second, society is constantly evolving, especially with new tech like AI. It is incredibly hard for you to like do something that will be permanently remembered in society because something new and better comes along the next day to improve on your legacy, which means you've stopped getting remembered and this new person is. But thirdly, it's just statistically the average person cannot just do something important. I think that's just really like, I think it's intuitive, because in order to do something that other people will remember, you have to do something that is exceptional, or you just have to be incredibly lucky to be in the position where like you will be in the spotlight. All of those things are just statistically unlikely. For all of those reasons, it means that for the average person, it is almost impossible to leave a legacy or one that is long lasting. That is really bad, because then why is it really bad for people to desire to do so? I think this is just obviously because it means that people are inclined to attempt to leave a legacy because they desire a legacy in the first place. That means they spend their entire life trying and aiming towards leaving a legacy instead of living in the moment. This looks like the fact that people are like oriented towards the consequences of their action and not actually enjoying the moment. It means that like instead of like going to school because I like learning, I'm looking at it for like, oh, the degree I will get, the career path I will probably take, and the ability that in like 20 years I will be the CEO of some big company or start up something that will change the functions of society. I think that is terrible, because OG believes strongly that living in the moment is preferable than working hard to leaving behind an achievement. This is for a few reasons. One, enjoying stuff for what it is just better than when it's conditional on success or failure. If you peg your entire value and identity and your worth as a human being on your ability to leave something behind, you peg it on the ability to be successful at doing so. This is a terrible idea, because it means that if you fail, which we've proven is statistically very likely to do so, your entire life is sort of ruined. First, because you don't succeed at your goal, which is just you feel bad, but second is because you're actually ignoring all the things that are good to enjoy in the moment, spending time with your loved ones, being able to try new things, for example, that gives you new experiences that are preferable to actually experience in life you just don't get because you're so focused on what comes in the future, which might never be successful. But second, there's just like a hedonistic treadmill, right? I.e., I achieved something. Yay! I am not happy about achieving that because now I'm thinking about the next step I can achieve to be even better than myself. What that means is I'm always under pressure and stressed to do more because it'll never be enough. And that's a terrible thing because you're constantly feeling negative, which has really bad impact on your mental health. Lastly, it's also just like by the time like you're 60 and if you haven't achieved something, you just feel sad for like 20 years of your life because at that point you're just like, it's too late to achieve something. Because all of the reasons I give about why it's incredibly hard, you also probably need to be like young and like you have energy and you'd be able to do stuff in order to leave behind a legacy. All of those are reasons just like why when you're old and you're like have less capacity to do so, you feel sad because you feel like it's too late for too old, like you're too late to try to leave behind a legacy. Before that, before my second point, CO.
Leave behind a legacy also interact with other human desires to produce a more positive outcome in terms of both their accomplishments and their daily life.
I will actually get to this idea of like positivity now, but I also just don't think that's necessarily true because I think, actually, I'm just going to characterize this. But second, I think even if in the odd case that you do end up being one of the lucky people that decides that gets to leave a legacy, I think in these cases, it tends to be bad legacies. I think this is because first, on the subpoint of like wealth, I think most people tend to live in like a capitalistic society or in some form is influenced by capitalism, even if your society doesn't tend to be under a capitalistic system. And a lot of people have been influenced by Western media to believe in the American dream. This means that for most people, they are socialized to believe that wealth is important because wealth equates to power, which is just a good thing that is idolized and lauded in society. But second, even if you don't believe that like capitalism is good and whatnot, if you don't believe wealth is good, empirically, it's just also the best way to leave a legacy. If you have money, you can donate money to name a building after you, boom, you have a legacy. I think that just means that fundamentally, regardless of it, capitalism or like wealth accruement is just one of the easiest ways to leave a legacy. Why then is it really bad to accumulate wealth? Two big things. First, it drives up wealth inequality. There's a few reasons. First is because you're likely to hoard money. The more money you get, the more likely it is you can leave a bigger impact. This is really bad because it's also the same mechanism of like you just never get enough money to be good. But second, you're also competing with everyone else for high income jobs for money's sake, i.e. you go into things like investment banking because that makes the most money and you don't actually go into things that you actually enjoy because they don't actually make money for you. That also increases the educational gap because that means the people who want to leave behind a legacy, that's the third mechanism actually. It means there's an incentive to keep others out because it's inherently competitive. It means that if I am succeeding, other people can't because I have to be the one to take all the money and they can't take any money. This is incentive not just to make the wealth inequality bigger, it also means an incentive to like stop other people from accessing things like education, things like higher education or like other like to access the same jobs that I have the opportunity to access. This more likely guarantees the fact that I can accrue wealth, which drives up wealth inequality. Second, it also just is like bad for the overall economy if everyone's trying to hoard wealth because there's just less liquid flow of capital within society, which means like there's less money going around, which like means it's like bad, worse for the economy because there's not enough capital to like support other projects and overall it's just terrible. But then second, other kinds of legacy, even if it's not capitalistic, is also likely bad. This is because the characterization of the person who wants to leave a legacy has an instinctual desire to leave your name onto something. I think it's not the same to say like, oh yeah, because you leave a legacy, you want to be able to make an impact that's good for other people. That's a burden op has to prove. But on our side, it's very instinctual. If you want to leave behind a legacy, that means attaching your name to something that I think is part of the motion. I think this means that it's inherently self-oriented and selfish. This is bad because I think it means that overall, having a self-centered mindset means it's easier to accrue wealth, for example. But second, it means it's also easier for you to leave a bad legacy because it's just easier because first of all, the incentive is negative. But second, it's the capacity, right? It's much easier to work with a system that is bad than to work against a system to leave a good impact on your community. I.e. it's easier for me to be a corrupt politician going into a corrupt system to continue oppressing people in like lower classes than for me to be like, fuck you, and like try to like change the system in the first place. That means for both incentive and capacity, it's easier for people to leave bad legacies. I want to preempt an argument about like, oh, not all legacies are bad. We think first of all, it's more likely, but second, it's just bad legacies leave far more long-lasting damage than good legacies can ever do because bad legacies have a more destructive potential that harms people's lives more immediately than like long-lasting like good legacies that like change things from like increasing education in the long run or like wealth accruement in the long run. We think that means it's a very proud OG.
Considering that I'm a graduating senior, this might be the last speech I ever give. I just want to mention that I personally want to leave a legacy on my debate team. Not only just like I want everybody to remember my name of Spencer McDonald, but I want to pass on this idea of kindness, strength, and learning and competitive spirit on my own team. I think this fits into the definition of a legacy that is more accessible in today's round and not just about like buying a building for your college. I think that we can access the idea of leaving a legacy that doesn't have the harms that OG is talking about with like a wealth disparity. So let's use the definition that I'm bringing you today of that a legacy is like a narrative, a story, a symbol of someone's life and an impact that persists even after death. That is what a legacy is. So that means that epic rounds that happen in debate and for example, in Carroll, we still remember rounds that were just interesting and fun, even if we didn't win. That is a legacy, and that's what we're leaving behind. That's what we want to leave. So I think that we need to keep that in mind throughout today's round, that I just don't think that we can keep it to purely just like buying buildings and being like a historical figure. Let's make it more accessible and more interactive for the education of today's round. I have 2 points of new matter that I'm going to be bringing you. First, the humanity of a legacy and minorities and legacies. But before I get into that, let's talk about some refutation. On the idea that it's inherently competitive and thus, I guess, somehow bad, just because it's hard doesn't mean the desire itself is bad. Winning debate rounds is hard. That doesn't mean the desire to win them is bad. So I think I need a little bit more link work here. On the idea of like not living in the moment, focused on the ends, I think that's really non-unique. You can still be stuck and anxious without needing to leave a legacy. You can be anxious about how you're leaving your life. And you can also conclude that legacy implies somehow living after death, which means that what you do here and now in this very moment does matter. So if you were to have the desire of a legacy, you actually care a lot more about living in the moment because that's what your legacy is. Thirdly, on the idea of hedonism and not being enough, I think this is pretty general because the end of this logic ends with nihilism. And so I don't think that we can just be like, it'll be never enough. And so we should just give up. I don't really see that. And also that's just like the beauty of humans, right? This is how we get progress. We didn't stop at the first automobile. We didn't just be like, this is enough, right? And we can stop trying, right? I don't think this is true. It's our desire to have a legacy that pushes progress forward. And then the idea of like bad legacies, simple ref, that leaves lessons for us to learn. That is really important as well. Bad legacies, if anything, are just as valuable. Sure, I'll take opening.
In order to achieve this narrative of being left behind, you have to prove why it's easier to do so than material goods. But second, we would argue that material goods are the reasons why you can leave a narrative, i.e. you have to record a good debate round for like people 10 years later to look at that debate round in the first.
No, so this round is about the desire, not about the likelihood. So I'm telling you that we prefer the desire, the need, the want. I think that need and want, whether or not you actually do it, doesn't fucking matter. It's whether or not you want it, and if that overall is going to change how you live your life, and that's going to be overall impactful. That's what we prefer. It's not if whether or not we want to leave behind a legacy, it's whether or not we desire it. So the humanity of a legacy. I think that it is in our DNA that we want to pass down our genes, right? That's why we want to like have children, right? I think this also lives in a metaphysical sense, that we want to pass down our ideas, our personalities, what we believe. And so it goes beyond DNA. It's in our humanity that we want to pass it down. We love seeing our fathers, our mothers' characteristics in our children. This is important. This struggle with impermanence is something that we deal with as humans every single day. And having a legacy allows us to kind of deal with that impermanence and say, I continue to live on, not just because my family bought this building, but because my ideas and my beliefs live on the people that I interact with every day, not just my children, but say the people on my debate team. Maybe they learned how to PM from me, and now they do the same thing forever, evermore, and that continues to get passed on. We say that desire is a good thing because that gives me an incentive to teach people my beliefs, to teach people what I have learned. It also allows us to not focus on the end. OG would like us to believe that all of a sudden we just want to have like some almost transactional belief about what we want to leave behind, when instead I think it allows us to live in the now, live better lives. No, thank you. Because we want to leave a better impression. We desire it. Whether we get it or not is honestly irrelevant in today's debate. It's that desire that we're talking about. And so we need to talk about how this desire, when we get it, will leave a path for the next people behind us as well. This leads me quite nicely into my second point of minorities and legacies, because I believe believe that legacies are particularly important for minority groups, because as somebody that is part of a minority group, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I am only allowed to exist as a trans man in society because Marsha P. Johnson threw the first brick. That is a legacy that she left behind. Albert Cashiers served in the Civil War as a trans man, and it is because of him that I'm here today. That is a legacy that I am benefiting from. And without his desire, without Marsha P. Johnson's desire to leave behind a legacy and toss that brick for the shit of it, I think that is important and leads us to better impacts. I think that overall we pave the path for people behind us. If anything, this could also be a timeliness argument too. We're seeing a rise in alt-right and fascism right now across the globe. We need to be able to look to our past, look to the legacies left behind that show us what to do, that we can do it. We can get past discrimination, and it is particularly important for minorities. So to say that we prefer a world where we don't have the desire to leave behind a legacy, I think we're losing all of those important impacts that allow us to follow that path and say, this is possible. We can get past this moment in history where we might be moving back. I think that overall, the biggest impact here that we're going to see, particularly on side op, is that the desire to leave behind a legacy allows us to connect with each other. It allows us to connect with each other throughout time and history in many different spaces that otherwise we may not have been able to do. We all have this inherent desire to leave behind a legacy. I don't think we have to argue in today's round whether or not we have the desire. It's whether or not we prefer it. And op and on status quo, we prefer the world where we do have that legacy because we have skin in the game to live a good life in the now and in the future and for the people after us. I'm proud to oppose.
First, 5 responses to OO, then I will weigh our case against the rest of the round and explain why we've proved the most important thing. First, OO wants to make this debate super fuzzy by saying that like having good experiences in the here and now is somehow leaving a legacy. I think that is obviously not in the motion. Having a legacy is being remembered after the point of your death by other people. Unless the fact that you like had really good experiences is like somehow remembered, I don't understand how this could possibly be in the debate. I don't think most people care about that. Response 2, they say this is like kind of an argument for hedonism. Sure, if you want to, panel, we'll bite that bullet. What does hedonism mean? I think it means like valuing experiences that make people happy. I want to be happy. Most people want to be happy. But I think most people aren't going to accept some form of like ethical egoism where only they want to be happy. We are social animals that have extremely strong moral instincts to take care of others. And those moral instincts are strongly enforced by social norms that most people are highly subject to by the approval of others in society and even in many other cases by laws. So I don't think this has anything to do with how moral of a person you are or not. I think if you are a good person, you want to help people during your life on either side. If you are a bad person, you want to probably like do things that help yourself on either side, and you're going to care about a personalistic versus another kind of legacy. Response 3, you learn from the bad legacies. This is nonsense. Is it good to do the Holocaust because then it teaches us not to do another Holocaust? That is absolutely ridiculous. It is not worth it to like actively do bad things in order to teach other people not to do them. I think we can do like moral philosophy in order to figure out like what the right thing is to do without having to have other people do evil things first in order to figure it out. Response 4, they say that you kind of like, we prefer the desire, not the legacy itself. Yes, this is exactly OG's point, which OO completely misunderstands. When you have unfulfilled desires, it makes you sad. If you could wave a magic wand panel and magically make all people in the world desperately want a Mercedes to feel like they lived a good life, would you do that? No, because most people will never get one, and therefore they will be more sad than they would in the counterfactual because they have this desire. This is exactly what Stella tells you. It is basically impossible for the vast majority of people in this world to leave a legacy. Therefore, when people have this desire to leave a legacy, and most of them wind up on a deathbed knowing that they will be forgotten, they are far more sad for like the back half of their life than they would be in the status quo. But response 5, they say that minority groups somehow benefit from legacies. Flip this, I think they actually have much less access to legacies. If I ask you to name 5 historical figures that you can remember, you're going to name 5 cishet white men that look more or less like me. I think because of structural oppression, they are much less likely to achieve a legacy. But moreover, we tell you that legacies are not inherently a good thing. They are oppressed actively by other people who wanted to leave a legacy. Panel, why does Putin invade Ukraine? The reason he invades Ukraine is because he wants to be the person that put Russia back together after the fall of the Soviet Union. There is one important burden that opposition has to tell you that they have not fulfilled yet in this debate, is why people are likely to leave good legacies rather than bad ones. And my partner gives you a bunch of important weighing on why these legacies are going to be bad. Now, I think one thing that might come out of closing is that this is going to like make you more moral in some way because you want to be remembered as a good person. Important caveat here. It doesn't make you want to be more moral. It wants you to be seen as moral. And this is a critical difference. For example, this means that you will tend to prefer things like making donations in places where you get credit. So when you want to leave a legacy, you're going to donate your money to like the foundation that will put your name on a plaque on the wall, or the university that's going to give you a building, and you're not going to donate to like malaria nets in Africa because it's not like your name gets stamped on all of the malaria nets. We think you get much more effective charity on our side because people still have the same basic moral desire to help others, but they don't have the desire to do it in a way that gets them to be remembered. Furthermore, I think that we might get out of closing that without this, people are going to lack the motivation to achieve greatness, and we'll get less technological progress as a result. This is ridiculous. The incentives towards greatness are already insanely large on either side of the house. 4 reasons. 1, humans are social animals. We want nothing more than the approval of our peers. You literally experience embarrassment less if you take ibuprofen because we experience social rejection as equivalent to physical pain. People encourage you to achieve greatness in your regular life. 2, there are large financial rewards to greatness. If you're a brilliant scientist or leader, you will get resources for that. Resources you can use now to make your life better. 3, most people who are truly great in fields do these things because they love them. Like, I don't think Einstein invented relativity because he wanted to be remembered. I think he did it for the love of physics, and this is true of almost all people who are truly great. Opposition needs to prove that this is the tipping point that gets people to strive for greatness, but on Gov, we tell you there are almost no people for whom this is the case. I think that people who are too lazy to fight to publish that next research paper in order to earn tenure that will help them next year are also too lazy to care about a legacy that won't matter at all until they die 60 years from now. But even if you think there are marginally more people who attempt to achieve a legacy on the motion, we still think those marginal people are motivated for the wrong reasons. They are doing the thing because they want to be remembered for doing it, not for the thing itself. Means that you're going to do things like if you join a social movement in order to leave a legacy, you are going to fight to become the leader of that movement, even if being the leader is not actually the best way that you can contribute to and support that movement. You are going to consider things like the president of our university falsifying his research so that he can leave a legacy of being a brilliant neuroscientist rather than just caring about doing the neuroscience itself, in which case you would have no incentive to falsify data. But before this, I'll take closing.
Negative legacy, for example, with Putin, necessitates that he's doing it not out of some current desire, but out of a desire to leave a legacy. Whereas all the positives you analyze necessarily are due to them wanting to leave legacy. Like not for like the thing you love.
What we're telling you is not that like, oh, people only have like positive or only have negative desires. What we are saying is that legacies are on net not good because people, again, like some people have bad desires, some people have good desires, and those like roughly balance out. I think if like most people had like good moral desires, the world wouldn't be the absolute fucking moral wasteland of like war and disease and depravity and wealth inequality that it is, right? I think there's just like a lot of fucking autocrats in the world that want to be remembered for being a great leader and like do things to do that. And I think that these people, these immoral people, tend to wind up in positions of power more often because if you have more options available to you, if you're willing to engage in backstabbing, bribery, corruption, do anything to get to the top, you're more likely to do so, you're more more likely to leave a legacy. Therefore, you get more bad legacies because immoral people are more likely to succeed. Therefore, these legacies are on net bad. But lastly, I'd just like to say that under a capitalist system, you're going to want to accumulate a lot of wealth in order to leave a legacy. We think this is bad because it increases wealth inequality at the point at which you pass it on to your descendants. Furthermore, you fundamentally have to exploit people in order to make money because you have to pay your workers less than their labor actually produces. This allows you to accumulate the money. So proud to propose.
Before I begin, just a preference to be made. Is it all right if I have no verbal POIs? I mean, I can't stop you from doing it, but that's just a preference of mine. Thank you. I believe that legacies are more than just names on a building. We've all had our coaches and the upperclassmen tell us stories of epic debate rounds, whether it be about kinky sex or some weird philosophy. Those epic debate rounds live on with us. And those epic partnerships live on with us as we carry on that debate legacy. Legacies are so much more than a donation, than a building with our name on it. I think legacies live within each of us because it's part of the human narrative. We are inherently drawn and we inherently desire the need and want to leave a legacy because that's part of our human narrative. Spencer already explained to you how legacies function and why that's so important. I'm going to continue this conversation by talking about that human narrative and cultural legacies and why that's something, and the desire to contribute to cultural legacies is what gives us such rich and deep histories. Before I continue on to that, I have a couple pieces of refutations that I'd like to address right now. The idea that the average person can't leave a legacy and then you go over like the economic pros and cons of a legacy is a pretty sterile characterization of a legacy. And I think I appreciate that the DPM has like shifted the debate more to like our idea of what a real legacy is, because it's not always transactional. When you want a legacy, you have skin in the game and the world around you. I will get into how this makes us consider and care about those around us in a little bit. But that moves me on to my second piece of refutation, which is why bad legacies exist. And Spencer already told you, yes, these are lessons to learn from. And I'm not going to deny that I also want to tear down the statues of Confederate soldiers and generals and whatever. And I also wish that the swastika didn't have such harmful negativity behind it. But for every example that they give you of something harmful and a bad legacy, I give you 10 examples of our smaller scale examples of this legacy. I give you the debate team, I give you my grandma's recipes, I give you something else. And I tell you that the power of standing in front of the Lincoln Monument outweighs those negative and bad legacies. But I'm also going to tell you why we strive for good legacies. Why people leave good legacies. Those big ones like uniting the Soviet Union are hard to achieve. And I think opening government is good to point that out in the first place. So they're less likely to happen. Not only that, but good legacies are easier to achieve. And they're easier to see in our lives, whether that be because the debate team copies my whip structure or I protest and I will see that bill come into effect before I die. Not only that, but when you talk about somebody like falsifying their research or something, that's because of a current desire to have power in their lifetime, not necessarily for them to leave a legacy. Also, immoral people want to see trans children out of their bathrooms today, not as a legacy of their life. My final piece of refutation is in regards to being remembered after your death. Spencer has already given you a bunch of examples of really important trans advocates. I also tell you that Jeanette Rankin lives on in my life because I believe in the power of women in Congress. Not only that, and there is no building on your campus named after any of these people that we all live on in our hearts. Not only that, but my grandmother's handwriting lives on in me. That's part of her legacy because she taught me how to write, and so my handwriting looks like hers. I also carry the middle name Margaret because there were 2 Margarets that came before me as my great-grandmothers. That's an important legacy. Don't call that fuzzy. That is the legacy. That's a piece of us. It's a piece of our human narrative. Let's get into that human narrative, though. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And this round is about this desire to want to grow our shoulders during our lifetime so that other people can stand upon ours in the future. I tell you that legacies provide context for others to be guided in today's life, and that legacies also give us stories by which that structure our lives. My example of this and how I'm going to characterize this is through cultural legacies. But before I continue with that, I'll take that half.
okay, so when I'm on my deathbed and all my legacy is, it's a really great debate found on a kinky motion, and there's a lot of other people who have left like amazing fucking legacies. How's that gonna make you feel on your deathbed?
The fact that I can look to my debate team, people I know, people I care about, and I can see that I've impacted their lives, I feel like that's so much more than people walking around on campus and stepping on a cornerstone that says my name on it. Really, our legacies are more about those around us, and I'm going to explain that to you further with cultural legacies. Functionally, most of our culture comes from legacy. You can look into the world around you and like make art, religion, and values and whatever, but most of it comes from culture, which is a context and legacy before you. That's why we would prefer, I will tell you why we prefer this world. And I tell you to think of your own cultures and communities and the powers of the legacies that live within your own cultures. I tell you that religion, my first example is religion. Those trails that you walk on as a pilgrimage were walked on by people before you. Their legacies live on, and we desire to have that as well. The martyrs that we sing hymns about survived and died before us because that's the power of a legacy. We desire that inherently. I tell you that music, the samples in our other songs, or even the beat of our own drums today is based on the beat of our ancestors dancing before us. That's music. I tell you food as well. The recipes are legacies of our mothers and grandmothers as they labored in the kitchens to feed us and our growing bodies. They wrote those recipes down because they wanted to be remembered. They desired to have that legacy. And I tell you that in language. They may tell you to stop trying to make fetch happen, but really making fetch happen is the legacy that we think we should strive for in today's debate, because that's a part of our culture. The desire to leave behind a legacy encourages us to contribute to this human narrative and those cultural legacies. This is good because we look to shape it with our own stories, our own lives. Then our cultures become a part of us. We're contributing to it, and it contributes to us. The desire creates paths for those before us with the same struggles in the future to stand upon us and advocate for those same rights, wants, and cares that we have. The desire has us interact with history, ancestors, our culture that has existed before us, and asks us to contribute to it further. I think that's what a real legacy looks like. It's so much harder to get a building named after you. Many of us, most of us, will not have that happen. But most of us do desire in some way to have a legacy, whether it be passed on our children, in our debate team, in our families, our communities. Those are the legacies that Spencer and I desire. And I think all of us desire on some human level because we're part of that human narrative. That's what Spencer and I bring you today, is the idea that we have to be contributing to that human narrative, and that desire is so natural in us. So let's give into it, contribute to the human narrative. Let your legacies be something as small as your grandchild's middle name or something as big as throwing the first brick at Stonewall.
To record my our head of training, and so this is helpful actually. Two missing burdens from OG. Firstly, why does the desire to leave behind a legacy necessarily going to overpower other aspects of their life? At the point, they try to claim that people are going to neglect living in the moment on their side of the house, and this will lead to bad lives. They don't prove to us why this is going to happen. That is our extension, and hence we access their benefits there. Second misburden then, about why legacy necessarily is the cause for the rush to accumulate wealth and to practice these things badly. We think that this is actually probably not that important in this debate because of the wealth of other like other motivations to accumulate wealth, right? What do these motivations look like? We think that capitalism means that a lot of aspects of our daily life and our quality of life depend on wealth, right? If you look at the housing market and prices skyrocketing, the price for food and eggs going up, the fact that you need to pay tons to put your kids into college, for example, these are all external factors that make people want to chase things like wealth simply because of quality of life. I don't necessarily understand why legacy is the driving factor. As a result, we think that this whole second argument on wealth doesn't have much delta, is out of this debate. And we think their point about immoral people like autocrats are going to probably be immoral on either side. This debate is won on the average Joe. Right. So what is important in this debate? We think that it's not about greatness. It is not about wealth. Rather, it is about how people go about living their lives in the presence of this legacy narrative, right? It's about how they treat themselves and others. We think that we're going to give to you some guaranteed, very, very reasonable impacts. And because of that, we're going to take this debate. So what is our extension in this round, right? Our extension is that a desire for a legacy, regardless of whether you reach it, regardless of whether the legacy is bad or good, influences your behavior for the worse, because the very chase of the legacy in and of itself is very, very bad. First thing to prove, we think that the desire to leave a legacy is necessarily going to take away from other aspects of your life, like your family, your friends, your focus on yourself, and your mental health. This is the missing link that OG fails to prove, right? Two reasons for why this is the case. We think that one, the very unique thing about a legacy is that it is an enduring version of you that lasts after you have left, right? So, engaging with side opposition here is the version of you that lasts after you leave your debate team. It's the version of you that lasts on Earth after you pass away. A legacy is specifically a version of you. So what is unique about this enduring version of you? We think that human psyche means that we want to control every other image of ourselves that exists in society, right? Think about this simple analogy with why we scrutinize photographs, why I looked twice at the team photo that we took as PDP because I didn't want to look bad in it. It's because we really, really care about our self-image. And at the point at which you have an enduring legacy, which is like another version of you, this is something that is necessarily going to take up more parts of their headspace, necessarily going to overpower about things like family and friends, because it's essentially a projection of yourself. We care about that more. But second point then about how this narrative interacts with other narratives in society, notably that narrative of individualism, and how this is going to cause the chase for legacies to be bad in and of itself, right? So why is individualism prevalent in society, and why is this necessarily going to be the narrative that legacy interacts with, right? We think that Western media has a huge focus on individualism. The people that we glorify in societies are highly, highly individualistic. Think about the rise of the tech industry, the people who are most wealthy just chase after their dreams single-mindedly. We think that generally Western media emphasizes individualism, and we think that there's a huge emphasis on achieving things in your own career, being successful for yourself. This is sort of easy to buy that individualism is prevalent. But what does this interaction between the legacy narrative and individualism necessarily going to look like? We think that it's going to redefine what leaving a legacy means, right? We think that leaving a legacy is probably going to mean doing something by yourself, and that is the only way that you can actually get credit for that legacy, right? It's something that you earned on your own and that you left behind on your own, right? So why is this so bad? We think that the way that you're probably going to behave when you chase after legacies is going to be bad, because insofar as like in the situation where you're working with another person, I think to do great things, these often require collaboration just intuitively, right? You're probably going to do things like undercut your partnerships and try to steal credit for yourself. So for example, if you're working on an invention with someone, you might try to steal it for yourself, try to get all of the credit. This is probably quite bad. But secondly, we think that you're probably going to push away other people in your life, like your family, like your friends. You're probably going to choose to come home late an hour later or 2 hours later every day from work. Over time, this accumulates. This is what makes your spouse mad. This is what sort of destroys relationships in the long term. We think this impact is very reasonable and it does accumulate. And we think that lastly, it causes a lot of just selfish behavior that leads to toxicity in your daily life. We think the chase after a legacy is enough to sort of achieve this. I'll take a point from opening.
Yeah, so societal pressure generally solves for the issue of wanting to undercut your competitors to leave a legacy. That's why I'm not cheating in today's round. So how can you contend with that?
Okay, well, there's a reason why Steve Jobs is the guy that's so glorified, right? I think that even if you're working with someone else and you undercut them, people tend to celebrate the person who did succeed and did come on top. This interacts with this idea of individualism that I already brought to you and explained like pretty comprehensively, right? Okay, so that's sort of our extension about why the chase for legacy in and of itself is bad, right? So how do we weigh this over OG? We think that OG needs to prove why the average person can't leave a legacy, and OO rightly points out that some legacies can be smaller, perhaps. Our extension sidesteps OO's rebuttals and wins on probability. Secondly, they need to prove why legacies that people leave are necessarily bad, but they themselves admit there's a spectrum of legacies. They can be good or bad. We don't see why that's a net harm, so we easily win against OG, right? So now against OO, right? A few quick rebuttals. I think that their case is largely uncharitable because when they bring up this point about minorities, I think that proving legacies like MLK and women's suffragists, etc., are good is not the same thing as proving the desire to have a legacy causes their good impact. Rather, we think that it comes from things like the desire to combat oppression, the desire to make lives better for trans people, women, etc. This is not from the desire to do a legacy. But even if it's from the desire to do a legacy, we think that you can celebrate the legacies that people have left without necessarily endorsing everyone's desire to leave a legacy, which is what the motion is on our side of the house. This debate is not about Mother Teresa. This debate is about the average Joe because side CG is the only side that recognizes this. Vote closing government.
Okay, first of all, with characterization, an important thing that all teams have missed so far is that these legacies that people have a desire to enact are able to not just be like individualistic legacies, but legacies that result from group activity and from being part of a movement. Like movement leaders, we argue, will always be movement leaders, will always want to do those things. But what's important is to think about the members of these movements, who, because of their desire for a legacy to enact change for their children and descendants and to enact a legacy from their movement, will cause them to be a part of this group and contribute to it. It won't necessarily mean, like as OG said, that everyone will want to be a leader. They'll just want the legacy from being like part of the movement, enacting, being an important part of it that leads it forward. Also, we argue there's familial and friendship legacies. Like lots of cultures, such as Latin American, like they pass down the names of family members that did good things. Like this is a very important individualistic legacy that's been missing as well.
On this, only one person can throw the first brick at Stonewall. Only a few people can win worlds. Only a few people can be remembered as religious martyrs. Panel, I want you to listen to opposition's own examples. To want a legacy is to want to be remembered, and most people will die forgotten.
As like the legacy is defined, legacy is like the long-lasting impact of particular events and actions. If your actions are like part of these movements that enact long-lasting legacies, this is how it's defined in the motion clarification. Then, like you are part of that legacy, and this is part. Okay. We also argue that people will want to leave behind positive legacies, and they'll probably act on their moral compass in a positive way. But anyway, first of all, we argue that this will leave people in the world with that gets rid of the desire for legacy. In the status quo, we want this to be a world where like legacy, the desire for legacy is only one of their desires. It doesn't have to be like, we're not saying we want this to be the thing that everybody cares about. And there's diverse legacies, that it's non-uniform, the desire for these legacies. So in like a world where completely there's no desire for legacy, we argue that people will do less great things, society will be moved forward less. Because those who really care about their craft will do things in both worlds. What the impacted population is a group of people that are animated by a sense of lasting accomplishment. The impact is like lots of accomplishments that move forward society might not occur. People motivated by egoism are like the people with the strongest desire to do things. People care about them. Okay, first of all, what's missing from Open Half is that we don't know, like it's hard to say what's driving these great people, whether it's power or legacy. This is just purely speculative. So it should be outweighed by our following arguments. Because like these great people will probably accomplish these things either way. We don't know if Putin wants to like lead Russia and take over Ukraine for power or for legacy. So we should care more about like these familial legacies and what we're about to say about movements. So on the movement level of legacy, we argue that like not everyone in a movement has unified goals. There's always going to be some disagreement. But like this desire to have a legacy, the desire to have a large impact on a macro level will increase group cohesion in these movements. And will like maybe some of these members and some of the leaders like care about the moral impacts like the most, but there's going to be like a lot of these members who mostly care about driving positive legacy for their descendants. And that's what is going to like bring these people on to being part of the movement, being part of something long lasting and larger than for themselves. Like a lot of these larger social movements will take a long time to have like any effect, such as like with trans rights, as I was talking about. Like a lot of these social movements will be crippled if like nobody in these movements have any desire for like being part of a long-lasting legacy. Yeah, if they're not seeing change in their lifetime, which is common, it'll just like reduce a lot of the natural human desires that people have to be part of these movements. So OO only talks about like movement leaders, but like the members are also necessary to take into account. And this is what we show, like the mechanism of how these movements actually work. I'll take over.
I'll flip the argument about like people being increasing group cohesion, because if everyone wants to leave their own legacy and leave their name on the movement, it means it's much more likely to fracture the movement in its entirety, because everyone wants to pursue the action they deem is best for the movement as a whole.
But people will care the most about like the action, like as a whole, the movement succeeding, because if the movements don't succeed, there will be no legacy. If there is like fracturism, like again, people care not so much about their like in this moment, like exactly like what they want, but just a legacy of the movement in general. So on to our next argument is that it's important to also take into account like the legacy among loved ones, not just like individual greatness and accomplishment, but just, and also not just like general cultural legacies as talked about in OO. Like this legacy among loved ones is what motivates a lot of people to like build and contribute to your family. Like, yeah, you love your children and want to take care of them, but this also like desire for legacy brings like a much greater desire to take even better care of them. And like, for example, to honor your parents, like there's a lot of Latin American traditions of honoring your family, your ancestors. This helps like make sure that people take care of their older family members and like are thought of as good in their like community and family. So this tells you like why the desire to leave a legacy is good, not just why legacies in themselves are good, as like a lot of the opening arguments focused on. There's much more reason for these parents to be like invested in their children's future. It increases social capital, it increases family cohesion. So yeah, okay. So moving on to OG, why we beat OG. Like what they argue that it won't make you more moral, it will just make you to be seen as moral and these charities won't be effective. Like Bill Gates's charity is effective. Also, like the immoral people that, as we like talked about in characterization, like there's still more desires. The immoral people like won't give any charity at all. This is just symmetric. So at least like in our world, there's at least some desire to leave a positive legacy and they give charity. For OO, like caring too much about your image will lead to like the desire to legacies for being bad. First of all, like we argue that this will lead to better relationships. You care more about having good relationships, about the people around you, your family members, your community, like having good memories of you when you have this desire and this culture. Yeah, and glorifying individualism. People aren't always individualists. Sometimes people just want to be a part of positive change. Like they don't, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to push to the top to have a legacy. They can be part of these movements.
All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think what side opposition does is they misattribute a lot of human emotions for legacy, right? Familial legacies and what the example they give you is responsibility to your own children and like compassion for your own like family, right? I don't think that's a really good representation of what legacy looks like. Legacy would probably look like only loving your children for the sake of leaving a positive like impact on everybody else, right? I think that's what a more accurate representation of legacy is, and that's what my member comes and gives to you, right? Side opposition's entire case is hinged on the fact that people only do good things just because they want to leave a legacy, right? I think that's a very bad misrepresentation. Think about it in the past, right? Think about the feminist movement. Do you think the first people who wanted to like actually like, I don't know, go out, work, get the same rights as men were thinking about, oh, if I do this, everyone in the world will remember me and I'll be a hero, right? I don't think that's the thought that crosses their mind, right? Their entire argument on good things only happen because you have that innate desire to leave a legacy is very, very unmechanized. And I don't really see how that actually happens, right? Secondly, on like ancestors and like these cultural things, I think if I'm a grandparent and someone names one of my children after me, I wouldn't necessarily believe that to be my greatest legacy. I think they don't understand the narrative that's in play in this motion, right? I asked this in a POI and I don't think they fully understood it. What I mean by that is the narrative is very, very, very fucked, right? As OG points out to you, they tell you that the narrative really pushes you to do a lot more than you actually can, right? How does this actually manifest? We tell you that this manifests in being dissatisfied with your own life, right? This manifests in ways of being like, oh, sure, I love my family. I did these good things for my family. I had fun. I laughed. But that's what everyone else does. What did I do to make myself actually memorable, right? That's the main pressure and burden that people have on their lives when there is this desire to leave a legacy, right? This is very, very harmful for the main actor that my member points out to you, who is the average Joe, right? For an average Joe, getting to the level of actually achieving that legacy is impossible, right? It's very, very, very minute cases that they can actually do it. So in majority of the cases, they're probably going to be very, very dissatisfied and they're probably going to be very, very sad, right? So now I'll take opening before I go on.
Yeah, some pastor MLK Jr.'s dream was for little white boys and black girls to go to school together, and this was future focus. And he knew he'd never see the fruits of his labors. So how can we not say this is not a reflection of his implicit desire to leave a legacy for change?
I think, okay, sure. Even if we grant you the fact that this only happens because like that was a part of legacy, I don't think this is really exclusive to your side, right? If MLK, okay, what would social movements look like without legacy, right? Social movements would probably look like, oh shit, there's so much oppression going on with people who have the same skin color as me, people who don't speak the same language as me, right? Like there's so much oppression going on that I just want to make sure that people around me don't have to go through the same fucking oppression and same fucking brutalism, right? I don't think like legacy is the only sole motivator for people to actually be involved in social movements, right? And we tell you that these motivations to be involved in social movements is going to be much, much, much better if these are not dependent on legacy. What does this look like? This looks like social movements that are rooted in compassion. These look like social movements that actually care about making a change rather than competing to be on the spotlight. This probably looks like eradicating performative activism, right? Their entire case is legacy. People care about legacy. They want to be a social activist. And what that will probably manifest in is, okay, I'll do this so that people can remember me. How do I make sure that people would remember me for the longest term? I go out there, I do the things that are the most performative, right? What is the counterfactual? And I think this counterfactual is really missing from side opening government, right? They don't tell you that why this is actually going to exist on our side of the house. And my member comes up and gives you like 4 mechanisms for why this is actually going to happen, right? This is going to happen because now other emotions, other things that are overshadowed by desire to leave a legacy, right? She tells you that desire to leave a legacy overshadows other parts of your life. It overshadows the good things that you would do with your family. It overshadows things that you would actually do with your partners, your friends, right? It overshadows a lot of other things which would in return like help would be a motivating factor for you to do other things like leave a good impact on society whatsoever, right? So even on their best case that yes, sure, desire to leave a legacy does lead to some form of social activism, it still exists on our side of the house without the extra burden of actually needing to change the world, be the greatest fucking person in the world for an average Joe, which completely beats out both opposition sides. That's why you vote closing government, right? Lastly, on opening government, right? I think my partner correctly points out to you on what missing burdens they have, right? Their main missing burden, as I previously pointed out, was to actually tell you why this is, to actually tell you why having a desire for legacy is going to lead a person to have a like actually bad life, and why it's actually impacting their personal relationships, why it's impacting their emotions, why it's impacting them in a really negative way to the extent that it's really, really bad, right? My partner gives you mechanisms on why that happens, and we take that clash. Secondly, on why legacy is the only reason to like actually accumulate wealth. My partner tells you that there's a lot more reasons to why people opt into that, and that will probably be symmetric on both sides. Capitalism still exists. I don't think how that's going to change. And lastly, on the clash on social like activism, whatnot, I probably gave like 5 minutes of my speech on social activism. That is going to be symmetric. People are still going to be advocating for the things that they're passionate about. Social change will still occur. Legacy is just a detrimental factor in a person's lives when they actually want to have social impact, right? And lastly, on the last clash about familial legacies and like small legacies, I think the way this narrative functions is very, very harmful in a way that even if you do leave smaller legacies, you tend to overlook those in favor of legacies that are really huge and that are glorified by your society, right? Things like the exact things like side opposition points out, like things like MLK, right? No fucking person is going to reach the amount of impact that MLK did, right? But what's actually going to happen is when you're on your deathbed and when you're like sad about looking over what you did in your life, that impact does not materialize. But in a world without desire for legacy, you do things that you actually want, you lead a happier life. That's the world we support. That's why you vote closing government here.
Time starts on my next word. I think overall what legacy actually is in this round has become really muddy. So let's start off the speech by giving kind of 3 clarifications as how you should evaluate what legacies are. First of all, the definition of legacy. Look to the motion clarification. The long-lasting impact of particular events, actions, etc. that took place in the past or of a person's life. This means we evaluate legacies not necessarily as an individualistic thing as they keep presenting, because that's nowhere in the motion clarification, but 2, we actually give you a link of analysis as to why you should evaluate it in a broader movement sense. This is because of the crucial part of, events that took place in the past or of a person's life. A person can have actions as part of an event that took place in the past that has a long-lasting impact. That is perfectly consistent with the motion clarification, and therefore, by our characterization, that legacies are not necessarily individualistic. But 2, we actually tell you why it is probably not individualistic. By all of their analysis, that really, really difficult legacies probably can't be achieved by the average person. Therefore, we think that the average person has a realistic expectation of what they can actually achieve. I don't think I'm going to become the US president and change the entire world, but I do think maybe if I, for example, go protest on a school campus and work as part of a movement, I can effectuate some type of change at some level. We think this is the most realistic type of legacy that people look to actually emulate, and not necessarily the big glorious impacts. Okay, that's the definition of legacies. Second, we tell you that legacies are also not uniform. There are big legacies and there are small legacies. Not everyone seeks the same type of legacy, and their entire side's case is predicated on the fact that everyone looks to achieve the biggest types of legacy. Again, we give you analysis as to why that is not true. Finally, we tell you that legacies
Yes, and finally, let me tell you that our side is not saying the only thing that matters is legacies. We think legacies interact with other human emotions in complex and complicated ways. Our side just thinks having a world where people have some desire to have legacies is better than a world where people have no desire to have any types of legacies on their side of the house. So these are the kind of 3 qualifications. Before I go on, I'll take POI from opening.
Yeah, people compare their own legacies to the legacies that they're aware of. They'll think of and compare to MLK, Bill Gates, and they will not stack up. Stella mechanizes in the PM why egoism, the number of people in the world in the hedonic treadmill means that people will never be satisfied with a small legacy, and you have failed to engage.
I get your argument. Yeah, but still, think about it this way, right? Even if you do not have the desire to leave legacies, if you can still compare yourself to really great people. You can be like, oh, I didn't really, accomplish something that amazing. But that's not the desire to leave a lasting impact. That is comparing what you have done versus what someone else has done. Moreover, we tell you this essentially occurs on any side of the house. And let's actually go into our points and tell you why we overall outweigh all of their arguments. So what are the main things that a closing opposition brings to you? First, we give you a movement level analysis of why this desire for legacies on an individual level matters. And this actually I'm going to weigh against what the POI that was just brought up. We tell you that while opening opposition gives you like the analysis of why maybe like movement leaders will want to engage in these things in legacies, we think that these like movement leaders or like massive world-changing events are probably symmetrical on both sides. Those people who actually have the ability to affect massive level change probably are driven by something, either legacies or not by legacies. It's really hard to tell because we don't know what Putin's thinking when he's invading Ukraine. So let's just wash the entire top half. But we tell you specifically why movements cannot succeed unless you have these individual members. We tell you that when these members of the movement, the regular people who join those movements, they're probably not expecting to be the movement leaders because they already see, oh, MLK is leading this movement, so I join to help him in his cause and leave this long-lasting impact. Therefore, we tell you that on their side of the house, these regular people who are looking to join these movements to leave those impacts no longer have that desire. Therefore, the size of the movement shrinks. MLK can't change the entire world with like 500 people. He needed that 50,000 individuals or like hundreds of thousands of individuals marching on Washington in order to enact change. Even if you say you like reduce our impact, you say, okay, there's probably other motivations impacting these people as well. Necessarily on their side of the house, they shrink the magnitude of movements and therefore lead to less overall positive social change.
On that.
I'm not taking anymore. Second, we tell you that we tell you that with these individuals who have contributed to some level of legacies, that actually contributes their positive self-esteem. If you were part of the March on Washington, and then you see like the Black community getting the civil rights like legislation passed, you probably feel really good about yourself because you were part of that movement. If you protested on a college campus and like the college stopped funding some sort of genocide, you probably also feel good about yourself because you've enacted some sort of change. Legacies also have positive impacts in the present to your own self-esteem in the current place. It is not necessarily just, oh, is my legacy comparable to like, I don't know, Nikola Tesla or something? Most people aren't actually going through that thought process. Okay, so that's the first level of analysis we're taking, which is the movement level. Now let's move on to why, like, on the individual, like, family level, we still outweigh, right? Well, their side, the only analysis that they give on their side is essentially like, okay, legacies are not the only thing animating people caring about their families. Sure, we agree. Like, it's not the only thing, but we think that is one of the things in a lot of cultures. For example, in a lot of Asian, Chinese, and like, Japanese cultures, or in a lot of Latin American cultures, the kind of family tradition that you pass on your name, you pass on your impacts, this like whole family tree where they have entire family trees like built up within their like lineage, that is a part of the legacy that you really care about with your family. That is a part of a large part of the reason why a lot of people in these cultures really contribute to their families and really care so much about them. This is in large part because of that kind of tradition and that kind of cultural coalition, that kind of coalescing of cultures. Yeah, therefore, we tell you that on their side, you kind of get rid of all of that. So while they still maybe have some level of this kind of family tradition based off of other emotions, we tell you that there's just no harm in also adding in that legacy part, which further builds towards that ultimate cohesion. So let's move through and tell you why we beat each of the teams, right? Starting on OG, we tell you that we beat OG because they failed to analyze actually why the desire for legacies is good. They only tell you why legacies are good or bad. We tell you specifically the desire for legacies is what makes the change. It is the thing that motivates regular people to enter these movements. It's what motivates regular people to care about others in their lives. And so motivates regular people in these long-standing traditions to really engage with their families. We provide you the mechanization that motivates the vast majority of people. Why do we beat OO? Well, I actually think OO has like a pretty good case in terms of like analyzing the actual overall impacts of legacies. However, we tell you they don't give you the analysis of why this matters matters to most people. The only analysis they give you is why it matters to movement leaders and why it matters to really important people. We are the ones who mechanize why specifically that these desires for legacies is what drives change at a micro and a macro level. Why do we beat out CG? Well, we tell you that's like basically the only real thing CG brings that clashes with us is the idea of individualism. However, we've already told you, if you're an individual, like a regular Joe, you probably don't think you're going to be changing the world anyways. And so you join these movements as a way to leave your legacy through a social movement, not necessarily as an individual level. And therefore, we tell you we beat them because first we just completely sidestep their entire individualist argument, and we co-opt most of their impacts through our analysis of why social legacies actually A, improve your own self-esteem, and B, improve the societal welfare. Therefore, we're really proud to oppose. Thank you.